hello. My name is Andrzej Krzywda from Arkansas. So I'm here in St. Petersburg, Russia, and now I'm sitting with one of the RubyMine developers. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Valentin. I'm actually team lead of RubyMine, probably mostly I spend my time developing it. So I am a developer.
Yeah. So we met the first time we met. I think it Wrocław RB, right? So now we are sitting in the JetBrains office. So I thought it was a good moment to ask the first question. Like, you are kind of between Java development and Ruby development. So what it is like?
Oh, well, to start with, Java and Ruby are very different languages. Besides the fact that Ruby is object-oriented, but still, in terms of programming, when I started doing Java, I used an IDE, and you have like all the types of all the variables. You have the types of return types of functions and incoming types of parameters, and it's all easy working. Like the context very well, and if you look at like Ruby program, it's very difficult to understand what's happening if you're not familiar with the language very much. When I started doing this, started learning Ruby, when I moved from reading a book to doing some like real stuff, it was like a tough thing to me.
Okay. So now when you're working on some features, RubyMine, that's 100% Java?
RubyMine is written in Java and Kotlin. Seems like Kotlin is our language and it is better than Java.
Okay.
So we're trying to use it where it's possible.
Okay. So again, a disclaimer, I'm a user of RubyMine, so I'm a client of JetBrains, and I'm a big fan of them, so I'm not hiding this. I'm promoting RubyMine whenever I can. But this is something that I'm not entirely sure, so I thought I would ask you. The refactoring possibilities in RubyMine, from my perspective, they're amazing. They're like I'm not always 100% confident that I will not break stuff, but there's really high level of confidence. But I see many, like also my colleagues and other people, they kind of try to use I would call them the simpler editors, like Vim, or obviously Vim is not simple, but it's more like they are not really IDEs. That's my point. And I was thinking, like, what's your perspective if they can replicate the same refactoring and navigation possibilities that we have with RubyMine? If from your perspective, can they somehow have the same experience with, I don't know, Sublime, Atom, VS Code?
I think the answer will be a long one. So to start with, obviously, since Ruby is dynamically typed, it is impossible to provide like 100% reliable refactoring. Well, in fact, for example, in Java, there is a reflection. So basically, like in all the languages, it's impossible to be 100% sure that like your change works and IDE worked correctly. So in my opinion, the world is not like black and white. There is no like, I will use only text editors, and if I use some refactoring tool, it must be like perfect.
Sure.
So basically, it's the question of how reliable is the tool, and I'm not aware of examples of tooling for Ruby, except RubyMine, which works well for Rails code bases. So there are now some extensions for VS Code, like Sorrelgraph. There are some plugins for Vim, but mostly they do not. For example, we try to replicate the whole object hierarchy in RubyMine, so that, for example, if you look for a symbol, like look for a method called, foo, you do not just look for all def foo entries in your project and libraries. So we try to see what receiver of this message is, then we try to build the whole hierarchy of classes, and then going through trying to simulate what Ruby does, we are finding that the definition of that method, or sometimes it just cannot be done because of, say, Rails magic, and we spend like a lot of time to like fix here and there like different Rails magic stuff to replicate their active record, find by something which is like
Right.
basically method missing implementations.
Yeah, exactly. So you cannot go that far with, in like, I don't know, guessing what is behind the method missing, right?
Yeah, well, maybe it will be possible at some point of time, but I don't think so. So I do not believe that it is possible to make like perfect analyzer for Ruby.
Mm-hmm.
So actually it depends on how much time do you spend on tooling covering like very specific cases.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe, I don't know, if some guy will go to Rails code base and populate it with, say, yard annotations
Mm-hmm.
to say, hey, there is like 10 of dynamically created methods of
Mhm.
such names so that tooling can adopt it.
Mm-hmm.
And again, like it's a question of how much tooling is aware of other technologies, say yard, RDoc, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So there will be gradual typing is coming in Ruby 3. So it's the question of how fast and how well tooling will understand it.
Okay.
And depending on that, like the analysis quality will increase.
So that's probably something you're preparing for with RubyMine.
Yeah, well, since several syntax formats for RBI formats, which is so RBI files are external typing annotations for future Ruby. Yeah, we started working on supporting them.
Great.
But this is like a long
Okay.
journey.
Yeah, but going back, I know that might be not comfortable for you to make the comparison, but like how much, like, okay, there's this whole approach with syntax, right? People are using syntax for
Yeah.
generating the kind of structure or the class hierarchy. You think the RubyMine capabilities are better than the ones that are generated by syntax?
Well, CTAGs is basically like looking by regexps for some symbol definitions.
Mm-hmm.
And like, as I said earlier, say if there is, so it is not enough to just look for def foo if you're looking for where foo is defined, because there can be hundreds of foos in your project and 50 more in libraries.
Mm-hmm.
And to understand which one this particular call is referring to, you have to understand what the receiver is, what other superclasses are, and depending on that, find the particular foo which is used there.
Yeah. So, but are you familiar with any other similar approach but alternative to RubyMine, which gets closer to what you have or better than syntax that people seem to use and it's kind of popular?
Well, so there is Solar Graph, which so I'm not like deeply aware of its implementation, but as far as I understand, they try to do the same thing. They try to build the hierarchy, but like the very common implementation is not enough to be aware of dynamic things or of Rails stuff. So the basic Ruby works there, but Rails with its, I don't know, associations, say like that, or I don't know, action callbacks. So to understand that there is before action, this symbol must refer to the method which should be located there. It requires some additional work.
Right. Yeah, maybe that's a good point. That, for example, I now work on a big project, but we followed certain architectural paradigms which let us decouple from Rails almost completely. So we are still using Rails for HTTP, for controllers, and so on, and for persistence in some places. But what happens, like we are using controllers in the most basic way. So we are not using any kind of controller callbacks or filters or whatever is the name right now. We are not using active record callbacks. We are not using active record associations even that much. So this is probably where I can safely rely on RubyMine, because my classes are like almost magic free. So the main code base is actually almost magic free, especially Rails magic free. So I learned to trust and rely on RubyMine, because in this environment, this is like almost 100%. So for me, like renaming a method is like no brainer. I just rename the method. I don't think too much about it. But it's true that sometimes we inherit some bigger Rails legacy code bases which rely on magic, and then you have to be more careful. So that's
it's true. RubyMine does not support all the cases.
Yeah,
Just,
yeah.
it's impossible.
The whole thing around RubyMine possibilities and around navigation is also important for me. I'm using this for learning new code bases, but also jumping between my current code base, which I know very well, so I could easily, I don't know, not use command click or whatever shortcut for jumping to the definition. I could do that, but what surprises me is how often Ruby developers rely on just grepping stuff, like when they want to find usages or they want to find a definition, they use some way of searching, grepping, or whatever their current tool allows. They don't seem to have the same like I do with RubyMine, which always surprises me, but I cannot really judge if it's better or worse. It just surprises me that it feels like, they're not really relying on the best tooling possible, I think.
Yeah, maybe like sometimes you do not want to be. I'm not sure if it's correctly to say in English, failed by your tooling.
Okay.
So if it works in like 95% of cases, some people are okay with that. And like it saves you a lot of time and you just use it. But in these like 5% of cases, maybe you have to fall back to grep.
Right.
So some people may be just not ready for that and they want to use like the same way of doing things for every particular task, but like in my opinion, like you have to use the right tool for the right task. If there is some magic and you like understand it, then okay, you can use grep or like finding path with user interface, whatever you want. But I don't think it makes sense to spend like 20% more time in doing this in terminal if it's possible to do in IDE. And it's not like only about user interface thing, it's also about like filtering the results. So if there are some, it's actually the problem sometimes if you like in IDE you look for usages of something with popular name, like say there is a method called name, and there are like hundreds of name methods in the project. When you invoke find users, it may take a lot of time for IDE to check whether each of these symbols actually refer to the one you asked for. But the trick is that actually if you use grep, then you're doing the same stuff just inside your head. So you can either like trust it to your IDE or do it yourself.
That's true. How much of your time is spent on supporting, like you're trying to integrate or support Rails in the best way you can? So how much time of your team is spent on just catching up with whatever Rails, new versions of Rails are doing?
Well, usually like at least one person is working on that full time.
Okay.
But mostly it's actually catching up, not supporting like the freshest things, because there is too much which is done in Rails and being done nowadays. And RubyMine team is not like that huge to support all of that in time. So, for example, Rails enums are being supported just now, being like the very like old thing, very classic thing. Is just like we did not have time for this before.
Okay, interesting.
But yeah, in my opinion, we have to spend as much time as possible on the basic Ruby analysis stuff to understand Ruby progress in general. Because if you improve like your basic analysis by 1%, it might bring much more result than like improving more like hard-coded cases for Rails.
So I was at this conference over the weekend here in your office actually. Part of my talk was bringing one idea to maybe making it more popular, but it's still more like exploration and research than actual stuff that I would suggest people to use. I hope I will be able to explain it quickly, so let me try. The idea is that you have one object, and this object, so the bigger concept is called data context interaction. It's a DCI. It's like an architectural paradigm, and apparently Ruby is almost a great fit for this kind of paradigm. And the main point at the language level is what they are suggesting, that we should have the possibility to change the methods of an existing object runtime, like runtime. So for example, in Ruby, you can say, So you initialize an issue object, and you have issue.extend. So by using extend and modules, we kind of can like extend the existing Ruby object in runtime with some new methods. The interesting part, which I showed as my talk, is that Ruby doesn't really have a support for unextend. So you cannot really remove the module. The internal implementation in Ruby is that there is a list of ancestors. So whenever you include a module or extend a module, it will be added to the list of ancestors. So there's also prepend, there's include, but I'm just using extend because it's more like at the object level. But let's say that, so because why do I want an extend? I want an extend so that I can think about modules as roles conceptually. So I'm adding a role to a living object, and they want to say, okay, now you don't have this role, now you will have another role. So I want to, like, using roles, manage the object runtime, change the behavior of the object. I don't really want to mess with instance variables. That's whatever is part of the instance variables, that's fine. I was really interested in your perspective, how this can impact IDE support like RubyMine, because now we are going crazy with the runtime modifications of an object. And if that's something that it can ever be supported by some tooling to detect what is the current, what is the current like role to be expected.
Well, I'll start with stating that RubyMine actually supports many of the changing ancestry changing methods. Like, for example, in Rails, it's somewhat popular to make define self.included for a module.
True. Yeah.
And instead of including something in the module inside this self.included, they include another module into the module to which this module is being included.
Yeah, that's more crazy than what I suggested. Okay.
No, it's just like maybe natural thing. I don't know, maybe my mind is perverted after reading this whole Ruby code bases. So we support that. Okay. But the problem is that we do not track these changes over time. So during this hated indexing stage, actually RubyMine reads through all the Ruby files in the project and libraries, and they detect these self-included or extend or all the ancestry changing methods and builds this whole model we use. So the question is how to change it. So if, for example, you introduce a method to unextend, we could understand it. RubyMine could understand it. The question is how to make this time-bound. Like to say that inside these couple of methods, there is one rule, one ancestry chain, and after some call, we have to change the ancestry chain. So this is something we are not capable of right now, but maybe it's possible.
So the only way, which was suggested to me at this conference by I think David Halas, is that probably I can do an extend in some scenarios by just doing undef. So by tracking what are the methods on a module, and when I know that I'm replacing a module, not just adding a new one, I can just grab the last ancestor, see the public methods, and just say undef all of them.
Well, maybe you could, for example, duplicate maybe a module with these implementations, and then undef them in duplicated one, so that original method is being intact.
Okay, it's interesting.
I know.
Yeah,
just a crazy idea.
Yeah, because I can undef not the module methods, but you have the singleton class, right? So at this level, I can change the actual object.
Yeah, but the question is, for example, if you included a role which overrides an existing method. So
yeah. Then I want to preserve the original one. However, for my simplistic scenarios, I would be okay with assuming that there's always one role at a time. So then I don't care about the history that much, unless it was maybe I do care, because maybe in the initial class itself there was a method, and then I would just make this thing disappear. Okay, so thank you for a great conversation, and thank you for working on RubyMine, and good luck with your progress with the tool.
Thank you very much. We'll try to do as well as we can.
Okay, thanks.